This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 228, entitled Masculist Militancy. Description. This flyer argues that masculists need to become a lot more militant to achieve their goals. This flyer suggests militant tactics that could be used, analogous to those used by the suffragettes over a century ago. The flyer itself, centering. Masculist Militancy by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer claims that masculists need to become a lot more militant to achieve their goals. Masculists are becoming increasingly conscious that the feminazis are becoming genociders, indirectly wiping out whole populations due to their takeover of the divorce courts, making them so toxic for men that the large majority of young men now refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. This paternity rejection on the part of these young men is crashing the birth rate and in time will wipe out whole populations. The root cause of this paternity rejection is the toxicity of the divorce courts created by the hated feminazis who financially crucify one married father in 4, making the feminazis the bitter enemy of the masculists, who then argue that these feminazi bitches have to be stopped. This flyer talks about ways to do this, suggesting a series of increasingly militant steps that masculists can take to prevent the feminazis from wiping out whole populations. Ironically, the masculists can learn a thing or two from the suffragettes of the first wave of feminism that took place early in the 20th century. The suffragettes, from the French, that is, women who want the suffrage, that is, the right to vote, pushed for women to be given the right to vote so that they would have the power to change the laws that capable, intelligent women wanted in order to liberate women, to be given the same right as men to decide which laws should be democratically adopted. Once the suffragettes had settled on the suffrage as their primary political focus, over time they became increasingly militant in their attempts to persuade men to give women the vote. Eventually, large numbers of women went on hunger strike in prison after they'd been arrested and were force-fed by having feeder tubes pushed down their throats. One British suffragette even threw herself in front of the king's horse in a horse race and was killed, making her a martyr for the suffragette cause. Suffragettes smashed windows and were arrested. They went on marches with placards in public, beating drums, etc. They became increasingly militant, putting increasing moral and political pressure on men to give women the vote. Masculists can learn from the tactics of the suffragettes. As a masculist myself, I believe in fairness for both sexes. If I were a woman, I would probably have been a second-wave feminist, fighting for equal rights with men, concerning issues such as equal pay for equal work, equal opportunities to enter the professions, etc., the right to end an unwanted pregnancy, abortion right, etc. I would want such things as a woman for ethical reasons, out of a sense of fairness. But equally, I would expect women to treat men with a similar sense of fairness, particularly in regard to women taking an equal share of the burden of earning the living by bothering to get a career-competent education, so that women can become FIPs, that's financially independent persons, as adults, and not be fluffies, that's traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man. As a masculist, I expect women to FIP up, and will punish them by ignoring them totally if they don't. Unfortunately, third-wave feminism is not about equality between the sexes, it's about genocracy, that is, rule by women at the expense of men, the most notorious example of which occurs in the divorce courts, that the feminazis have taken over and use as a means to punish men for being men. 1 in 4 1 in 4 married fathers will be financially massacred in these fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce courts, losing his kids with 90% probability, losing his house to his fluffy ex-wife and half his possessions, forced to pay child support to kids he will barely see, and often alimony to his fluffy ex-wife so that she can remain a fluffy, parasiting off him after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. Masculists lash out at the hypocrisy of third-wave feminists, labelling them fluffy feminist hypocrites. They are hypocrites because on the one hand they want equal rights with men, but on the other hand reject equal obligations with men, particularly in the obligation to share the burden of earning the living by getting a career-competent education. Most feminists are still fluffies, having traditional attitudes towards men, seeing men as cash machines, put on this earth to pay for women to have babies. This is a deeply held attitude with the majority of women that masculists aim to drum out of women. Most fluffy feminist divorce court judges and lawyers see men as subhuman cash machines to be punished for being men by making them pay for women to remain being fluffies. These fluffy feminist divorce court judges and lawyers need to be educated by masculists to adopt masculist values, seeing men as respect-worthy, as the superior sex who should be honoured. Instead, these feminazi bitches have made themselves hated by men, particularly divorced men, who are burning with resentment and rage against the massive injustice committed against them. Young men see the damage done to their fathers, uncles, older male friends, and come to the obvious conclusion that marriage is to be avoided, so too with fatherhood, because the hated feminazi bitches have made marriage and paternity toxic for married fathers. The risk of 1 chance in 4 of being financially massacred by these feminazi bitches is way too high, so young men simply opt out of the traditional man-slave role. They go their own way, refusing to marry, refusing to have kids, and spending their money on themselves so that fluffies can rot in hell. Now that 2/3 of young men in many Western countries are now rejecting the man-slave role, joining the MGTOW, men going their own way, movement, masculists are waking up to the idea that indirectly the feminazis are wiping out whole populations, that the feminazis are thus becoming genociders, and hence, in capital letters, must be stopped. At this point, the 2 main branches of the men's movement, the MGTOWs and the masculists, part company. The MGTOWs are politically passive. They just quietly walk away from marriage and paternity. They are not politically active. They don't become militants the way the masculists are now increasingly becoming. The masculists are very political and moralistic. Masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to fip up or be punished by men by not getting a man to have any kind of relationship with her. Masculists are sharply critical of the apolitical wimpiness of the MGTOWs, criticising the MGTOWs harshly for not showing any solidarity towards the gender plight of other men. Most MGTOWs are cynical that masculist militancy would have any effect. 2 prominent MGTOWs, Sandman and TFM, turd-flinging monkey, think this. In Sandman's case, who has some 100,000 subscribers, he doesn't have a political bone in his body. He is simply uninterested in politics, so excludes himself from a militant course of action due to his personality. TFM, on the other hand, is obviously angry at feminazis, spending a lot of time on the internet complaining about their gender crimes against men, but is convinced that being a masculist is a waste of time due to the fact that women are 51% of the voters, so that the gender politicians would never vote in a pro-masculist agenda through fear of being voted out by the bloc female vote, given that women benefit so much from the feminazi-dominated divorce courts that are so heavily biased in women's favour. But TFM's apoliticality prevents him from seeing that there's a loophole around his 51% argument, and that is that using masculist tactics, women can be converted into female masculists through fear of not having babies. Masculists use MGTOW tactics politically, that is, masculists tell women that, quote, if you don't help men fare the gender laws by putting voting pressure on the gender politicians, then men will remain MGTOW and hence you won't get a baby. So in the form of a masculist slogan, vote with men to men fare the gender laws or remain babyless. So the masculists now have a clear path forward to achieve their goal of creating a FIP society, in which both sexes are socialised and educated to become FIPs, so that nearly all of the gender issues that men have can be removed. With fluffies wiped out, the divorce courts can be men-fared. The paternity rejection rate can be brought in, so that a woman who continues with a pregnancy that the father rejects can afford to pay the full costs of the kid. Alimony will be thrown out. The owner of the house gets to keep it. Custody of children in a divorce is joint by default, etc. The Masculist prime political goal is to wipe out man-slavery, that is, men working for women, worldwide this century, by wiping out the fluffies, not by killing them, but simply ignoring them to death, forcing them to become FIPs, or they're punished by men by not getting one, rotting on the shelf to extinction, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, poor, and spat at. So Masculists now need to concentrate on getting the gender laws men-fared. Masculists need to become more militant, the way the first-wave feminist suffragettes did a century ago. Here are some suggestions on what Masculists need to do to achieve their goals. 1. Get rid of the feminazis by discrediting them so powerfully in the culture that they die off, forcing them to go underground through fear of showing their head above water, to have it shamed out of existence. Society needs to be taught that feminazis are genociders and have to be stopped. They are monsters who are destroying men in the divorce courts, causing young men to go MGTOW, thus forcing babylessness on young women, so that both sexes end up hating the feminazis, causing third world feminism and all its genocratic misandry to die out. 2. Put enormous moral pressure on the fluffies to force them to become FIPs by bothering to get a career-competent education. There's a lot of masculist work to be done here, because in today's world, still some 3/4 of young women at age 16 choose to become fluffies as adults by choosing to study fluffy crap majors. That is, the soft option of memory-based subjects such as English literature, history, languages, instead of the more career-competent majors requiring analytic thought, such as math and the sciences. These fluffy crappers are then forced to study more fluffy crap at college because they're excluded from studying STEM, S-T-E-M, science, tech, engineering, math, and the professions, because they do not have the prerequisites in the analytic subjects. These fluffy crappers then grow into their 30s and realise their fluffy crapper diplomas cannot give them a good salary, so go looking for some gullible manslave to parasite upon, so that he will pay for her to sit on her fat parasitic ass and live off his money in his house that he pays for. Fluffies are the enemy of the masculists, who need to be wiped out, so it's important that masculists set up masculist groups in every high school to put real moral pressure on fluffy students to study the hard option, that is the career competent option, or risk never getting a man, not even being pumped and dumped, because the woman has acquired the dreaded label of being a fluffy. 3. Masculist groups need to be set up in every college and university, so that masculist and MGTOW ideas can be taught to both men and women. Men need to be taught so that they can avoid the hell of the fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce court, so that they don't marry, don't have kids, and adopt the MGTOW/masculist lifestyle, perhaps tway-tweffing, in brackets, 2A, 2F equals 2 apartments, 2 FIPs type relationship, so that when the relationship fails, the man can simply return to his apartment, cost-free to him, no divorce, no kids, no alimony, no hassle, but never living with a woman. 4. Women need to be taught masculist/MGTOW ideas so that they FIP up and vote with men to force the gender politicians to men-fair the gender laws, so that women can have babies again. Once men learn that the men-fair divorce courts are no longer toxic for men as are today's. As part of this masculist/MGTOW education process, men's studies courses need to be set up at universities and textbooks written by professors to teach them. 5. Masculists and MGTOWs need to continue putting out videos on YouTube and other platforms, in brackets, which don't stupidly censor the way Jewish feminazi CEO'd YouTube does. to educate men and women on masculist/MGTOW ideas. New section. Once there are many politically motivated masculist groups in high schools and colleges, collective action can then begin. For example, here's quite a list of things masculist groups can do. A. Get on the broadcast media with an angry masculist message. This will spread masculist/MGTOW ideas to the general public, to the masses, the millions, the billions, so that nearly everyone becomes familiar with them. This education process will speed up the creation of a strong social and political pressure on the feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers, plus the hated gender politicians, to amend further divorce laws and gender laws in general. B. Once the masculist/MGTOW ideas are well known to the public, then the political actions can begin. For example, large numbers of masculist groups at the same time can go to every family court in the country or the state and write graffiti on their outer walls, crime scene against men, and then contact the media. This is a clear example of militant action on the part of the masculists. C. Masculists could set up a grey list of names, emails, addresses, photos of feminazi or male feminist traitor divorce court lawyers and judges and spread them via the internet to masculist groups. These feminazis could then be targeted with actions such as being bitch-slapped in the street, having their house windows broken, their car windscreen regularly smashed, etc. These incidents should be regularly reported to the media with the message, "These feminazis are genociders, wiping out whole populations due to the toxicity for men of the divorce courts that they have created and have to be stopped." I say grey lists because they are not yet black lists, in brackets, that is, hit lists where people are crossed off the list through murder. The masculists hope that these grey list tactics will be sufficient to persuade the hated feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers to change their tune after being the victims of grey listing. But if that doesn't work, then the masculists will need to become more militant, because there is so much at stake, that is the very survival of whole populations. D. As the population keeps falling, ever more militant actions will be needed to change things. Eventually, these genociders will deserve to be murdered, and this is what will happen. Masculist hitmen will take them out with a bullet. Such masculists will be seen as soldiers in an army of men's lib, fighting for men's issues. Nothing is more important to human beings than the very survival of human beings. So whatever is necessary to preserve the survival of human beings will be used to achieve this end, even collective murder, usually labelled a war, a sex war. E. With powerful masculist moral pressure on the broadcast media against fluffies, against the feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers, and particularly against the hated gender politicians, then the majority of voters, both masculist and female masculist, in brackets, to overcome the 51% argument, should be able to force the gender politicians to systematically mend further gender laws so that masculism is no longer needed. F. If this does not happen, then the very logic of the situation will eventually lead to a sex war in which feminazi divorce judges and lawyers, divorce court judges and lawyers, plus gender politicians will be murdered. Despite desperate times, as the population crashes, will demand desperate solutions. Hopefully things will not need to go this far, but whether the sex war reaches the murder stage or not, one thing is for sure, and that is that masculists need to become a lot more militant to achieve their goals, using such methods as suggested above. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channels de GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers, and de GARIS Essays. Ciao.